getting into a conversation this hour, and he's here in the hot seat, and he'll tell us why he's disappeared for some time. Already putting you on the spot.
I can hear.
Jimi Wanjigi is the Safina Party leader, and he's here this morning. Jimi, good morning.
Good morning, Drew. Long time.
Have you been in Kenya?
Yes, off and on.
Okay.
But yes, mostly here. It's good to meet the two Dennises too.
Yes, I'm surrounded.
I don't know which one is Dennis the Menace here.
It has to be the younger one.
Okari, real pleasure. I don't think we've had the honor.
No, we've not met before.
Okay.
I only see you on TV.
Yeah, I also see you on TV.
But good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, likewise.
Okay.
Do what's this about today?
This about today is asking very many questions indeed, and as we get into it, we'll tell you what those are. We're looking into 2027, whereas we're 2 years away from the election. You would imagine that tomorrow is the day that people are going to line up and take the vote. But before we get into that, the other Dennis,
The Menace.
Yes.
I'll leave that to you. He's taken us to a different country this week. He'll tell you where that is, and we'd love to hear your interpretation of this proverb.
You're having this discussion about Dennis the Menace. We're actually having that discussion over the weekend.
Oh,
because
you are?
they used to appear on the newspapers and all of a sudden they disappeared.
Yes.
So if you go to the library, they are there. So if you want just a history of Dennis the Menace, it is there. But today we are in a country whose capital is Gitega.
At Gitega?
Yes.
Hey,
It's in
which country
East
is
Not
that?
Kenya. It's not here,
Kenya,
Thika Road.
but it's in East Africa. Previous capital was Bujumbura. Now we're in Burundi.
Now we're together.
Burundi, yeah.
Yes.
The sad thing about the country is it's considered to be one of the poorest countries in Africa. But if you look at the agriculture they do is great enough to push the country's economy. And one would only hope that they get to take advantage of that to change the situation in the country. Today, let's talk about the proverb. It's all about fire and smoke. And you can't hide smoke if there is fire.
Yes, you can't.
How do you interpret that?
When there's smoke, there's fire. When something is burning, you can't hide it. That is very much the situation in this country of ours.
Okay.
Okay. From your interpretation, then I riddle you a question. Are things burning in Kenya?
Oh, completely. We have a revolution that has not stopped. And before I say too much, let me say that I'm honored to be here in the month of Sabasaba. This is the month of Sabasaba. A revolution that catalyzed what we call the second liberation of Kenya. And it's good to be here. I'm very proud to be here this month. At a time when there is the third revolution. This is why Kenya is burning. It's very clear that this third revolution was witnessed a year ago when we had the Gen Z uprising against the finance bill. And it's important that people understand that it was not just about the finance bill. It was about their political and economic future, their stolen future. That is what it was about. And before I go any further, I have been here several times, and one thing I always do is make sure that we remember our fallen soldiers. Last time I read up to, I think, number 40. You must recall that there were 60 that were killed last year, at least confirmed killed. This year again, I don't know the number last week, but they say it's 19.
Yes, we're at 19. Officially.
Now, you're talking about 80 young people whose lives have been taken. So I'd like to read the next 10 names, if you don't mind, so that we remember them and remember that we cannot forget them. Yeah? They are us and we are them. Those names.
Are these the names of last week?
These are the names of the 60 that died last year.
Yep.
And these names I have been recording here over the last few sessions. Mm-hmm. I had reached number 40. Mm-hmm. So now we go to 41. Dennis Juma, who died in Embu. Falandlio Nakara, can you believe it or not? A Tanzanian, a young Tanzanian man who died at Sunbeam. Braxton Omar Mogesi in Homa Bay. Besco Tonyango alias Benson Bidi Okumu in Kisumu. John Boidearis in Nyeri. Timothy Mashua in Nyahururu. Wycliffe Kane Mwenda in Nairobi. Daniel Kaikai Bungoma. Timothy Miheso in Kakamega. And Charles Owino in Kitengela. Now, you can see the different array. These are different communities, different people that came together to say, you are no longer going to steal our future. And that is the symbolism of Sabasaba. Sabasaba was about a stolen future that had been taken away from a period of independence. Every generation has stood up in this country against what they believed was a stolen political or economic future. You had the generation of Mau Mau that came in very clearly after we became a colony, 1920. They woke up, many of them, even Dedan Kimathi is rumored to have been about 26, 27 years old. You have people like Mariama, who were 24. You know, they were young people that decided no matter what it took, they were going to go to the forest and make sure that the two things they are fighting for, land and freedom, was going to be returned to the native African, the native Kenyan. And they did. Remember, it was both political freedom and it was land, economic. When independence came, unfortunately, although Jomo Kenyatta was a hero of the liberation struggle, because, you know, there's been a lot of debate, but at the end of the day, he did serve 7 years in detention too. He did. There's a lot of debate. But he seems to have compromised to what at the time were the sympathizers to colonialism. These were the home guards. They're the ones who seem to have taken over the government. And in as much as we got the African in terms of political leadership, we have been elusive in terms of our economic rights. It has been elusive. We got quite a number. We took over the reins of power from the Mzungu, but we took over power that the Mzungu had created in 1920. And Dennis, you were not here last time when I was talking about this.
No, I wasn't, but I was watching you.
You were watching me?
Yes, I was.
You know, there was a system that was set up here in 1920 by a private company called Imperial British East Africa. That was simply this. We are coming to extract, exploit the African, and dominate them. These police you see here were the watchmen of those Mzungus. They're the ones who took over as the domination arm. The government of Kenya that came into force at independence still modeled itself around the same. The only thing it changed was the color of the skin of who was ruling. Jomo Kenyatta, in his wisdom, did provide a system that empowered us to a degree in terms of land. There was a land demarcation. There was clearly land Mzungus were made to give up. And the country developed a foundation, right, that was to lead to our prosperity. But we had challenges. And those challenges led to a dictatorship. Do you know the Constitution was amended and consolidated in 1969 to embed dictatorship? No, you didn't know that, did you? There was a consolidation from the Thurgood Marshall Constitution in 1969 that embedded dictatorship.
How would that
embedded
For it to live out how?
Like multi-partyism.
Okay.
No multi-partyism.
Yes.
That is what embedded the single party called KANU. Okay? Right? And that was a progression that was not envisaged at independence. So we got power and then said, now we're going to make sure that the choices of freedom, political freedom, are limited. It is that choice that led to the beginning of the second liberation. The 70s, 80s, and 90s were full of the second liberation for our political rights. It was that embodiment. All right? Moi, in fact, when he took power, further consolidated that constitution with something like 82 amendments to strengthen the power of the president and the single party. So it just tells you how much, how far we have come from. Now, at that time, you had what were called the bearded sisters. They were being called that by Jonjo, right? People like James Orengo, who stood up, at the time young men, my own party leader on the outside in the 90s. You had people like Kenneth Matiba, right, who were then middle-aged. You had Charles Rubia, same. You had even people like my father, who stood up against the dwellings in Moroto and so on. You had, on top of that, a generation of professionals. This is where Paul comes in, the Martha Karuas, and so on, that stood up in their time for the second liberation and said these political rights that were envisaged by our forefathers must be adhered to, must come back. And the clarion call was the removal of 2A and reforms to the Constitution. I say that those reforms, which continued in 1997 with movements such as Mageuzi, those reforms that brought about, even in 1997, the limitation of the president's term of 10 years, were done by a generation of young Kenyans, patriotic Kenyans. That climaxed in 2010 with the new constitution. But look at what it took for the 2010 constitution. We had the exit of Moi in 2002. The beneficiaries of the exit of Moi were mainly Mwai Kibaki, who at the beginning of multipartyism was nowhere near. He was KANU Damu. He was single party. He was a man in many ways, and he actually said it, that it is impossible, he said, right, to cut KANU and cut out the single party. He even said that it is like cutting a mogumo tree with a razor blade. All right? But he became the president of Kenya. And in as much as we praise him for a lot of the economic gains that we got, because he was a true economic liberator, he believed in it, we must not also forget that it took the lives of 1,400 Kenyans to then have a new constitution in 2010. We cannot forget that. In other words, the struggle still continued. The struggle still continued. But as far as I'm concerned, that was the end of the second liberation. We got our political reforms. We can now speak as we are allowed to speak. It is now this government that is trying to draw back those gains. That, writing on social media has become a crime. Expressing your opinion has become a crime. These were things that were in the 90s, in the 80s. We have a new constitution that will not allow it. That protest is a crime. You seek to criminalize it by hiring goons. You want to stop the political process that is already done in the new constitution. And why that is happening is that there is a new revolution, something that has not been achieved yet. That is the economic one. It has not been achieved. This is still a government and a system that extracts, exploits, all right, and tries to dominate us with their police.
And yet, with a number of people who then, at that time that you speak of, are still within political circles today, who understood what the struggle was to get to a place where you could actually speak openly, and are part and parcel of a system whereby it's characterized by the things that you speak of. But we're not hearing them speak out. We are not hearing them say this has to stop. If anything, it's one big party and everybody is just, continuing with it as though it was normal.
That's why.
Characterized by people who were in that same struggle that you speak of.
Yes.
That got us to the point where people could speak openly and not for fear of being disappeared or kidnapped.
Yes.
And then still operate in a time today where they're not speaking out about the things that we see that are entrenching a free, quote-unquote, era.
This is a very different era. Okay? And they are having difficulty catching up with it. This is a new revolution. An economic revolution is at an entirely different time. They went through their political rights period and they cannot find a way to anchor themselves in this new revolution. That is the problem. They are torn between the politics of the old, which was about tribe and coalescing together and arguing and finding a way to be on the table for the same process of extraction, exploitation of the people, to now facing a revolution that they have never imagined. The empowerment of majority of Kenyans. It's something that they cannot grasp. A detribalized country, they cannot grasp. An issue-oriented country, issue debate, they cannot grasp it. They do not see their future in it. So in as much as they talk, they'll talk with a forked tongue. They'll talk sitting on the balance.
But Jimi, is that surprising? Because you've given us a very good, clear history from fighting for independence, post-independence, the clamor for, the liberation movement and how it has changed. And you're looking at students of those old systems who are today in power. So is this then surprising?
No.
That whatever they're doing, like you rightly said, is taking us to the 90s and to the 80s, where it was extractions. It was, if you voice your opinion, it's dissent. You will disappear. And right now, people are disappearing. The headline on the Standard today, they're asking, where is this young man for posting on X? Even posts that are clearly jokes for a mature person, they're taken really seriously. There's a report, I'm just seeing something that is just coming in, that there's another gentleman again who's been abducted.
Last night.
Yes. I mean, does this then surprise you?
No, it doesn't surprise me. I don't know why it surprises Kenyans. Because a lot of the people we are talking about are exactly what you're saying. They've been part of the old order. What I think you are not looking at is that even though they have come together, for example, the reaction to the last protest in 2024 was to bring a broad-based government, was to say, okay, who is the opposition leader? Karibu kwa serikali. Bring your experts, as they call it. Right? Let us try and rejig this relationship. It is kick out the hawks on both sides. If there was a hawk this side called Gachagua, kick him out. The hawks on the other side, kick them out. So that now there's a union under the basis that we need peace, we don't want any more killings. Okay? What does it tell you a year later with the demonstrations last week? It hasn't worked.
No.
Yeah. And
Wananchi and the Gen Z are far ahead of them. The game has changed and they don't get it.
Yeah. And Jimi, as that game has changed, there is also the relentlessness on the fact that we will push these until we get the justice that we want. Just how is the new phenomenon around Gen Z going to change the game for 20?
It has already changed it. I don't know why you're looking at 2027. Everybody is going towards a process that has already been implemented. We have never in this country, Dennis, you must appreciate what has happened. Mm-hmm. We have never seen this country rise up on something called an economy ever in the history of Kenya. Mm. They rose up against a finance bill. How many people understood what a finance bill was until last year? Yeah. How many people? They rose up about money. In your lifetime, in my lifetime, we've never seen this. This was something that people said happened during the time of Mau Mau. All right? Have you said, our economy is our land? Wait a minute here. We are going to go and die for it. And 300,000 Kenyans died. That is the estimate. Were killed by the Mzungu. Last year, you had a young generation called Gen Z that got up and said, for this economic agenda, it wasn't just about the finance bill. It was about their stolen future. It is about the nation's decline rather than its greatness. They got up and they changed the axis of Kenyan politics. It's not a question of 2027. It has changed. The political formation that was there tried to rejig itself. And a year on, it hasn't changed. And they haven't changed. They're still resorting to killing and maiming, as you're saying, Dennis.
But is the story changing? You've said last year it was anti-tax protests. So you had people explaining the finance bill even in their mother tongue. So we'd never seen that. It's correct. There was also the question of accountability. We were seeing cabinet secretaries showing opulence and
with the people's money.
Exactly. And so they were coming out and they were saying, look, we've read this bill. This is so punitive. We want to secure our future. Therefore, we'll go to protest. But is the political class changing that narrative? Because now what you're seeing today is a fight for justice.
Dennis, let me say this.
Yes.
Let me say this.
Yes.
The bill was just a catalyst. The people were already feeling pain. What they resisted was more pain. Please understand that. Economic pain.
Yes.
Economic pain. So they were resisting a further economic pain with the finance bill.
Yes, correct.
That's why the demonstrations even went on to Nane. Even after the finance bill had been dropped, they still continued because it was an expression of the economic pain. A year on, the economic pain is still there, if not increasing. The demonstrations, whichever way you look at it, the biggest catalyst is that people are going through economic pain in nearly every home in this country. Nearly every home, apart from Ruto and his 10 friends. I don't think there's any home in this country that is not going through major economic pain. So the pain is continuing. You can brand last week's demonstrations as justice or this. What justice? It's economic justice. The death of Ojwang, the police miscalculations and abuse of power were catalysts to anger, further anger. But even I believe without that, it would have still happened. So-called as a remembrance, but what are they advertising? They're saying, we are still in pain and we don't want this system anymore. However you have rejigged yourselves, yeah? You are still contributing to the nation's decline. You must get out. That was a clarion call. You must get out. This system must leave. And when you say we're waiting for the next election, that is you and those who are calling for one term. That is a system that has already been set. Why wait for it? Kenyans, when they downed the finance bill, if you look at any country abroad, any modern Western democracy, the death of a finance bill is a motion of no confidence.
Absolutely.
All right? They lost it last year. What are they still doing in power? What are they doing in power?
Well, I mean, by your own admission, Jimmy, you said that nobody's in a position whereby they're going to say, well, okay, I can see that things have gone to the dogs. And so as a result of that, let me step down. Nobody's going to do that.
Let's look at it this way, Do. They have tried to rejig themselves. We are back to square one.
With the same people.
Same people. They try to rejig, trying to say, okay, let's get the opposition leader, bring him in. Let us try and say we have a government of this. They've created narratives about what they are. The whole country is here. The country was always in cabinet anyway. It's no difference. Okay? Now, you come back. The pain is still there, economic pain. Gen Z still come out on the streets to express that to you. And what is your reaction even with broad-based? You kill them again. Mm-hmm. And the only reason you're killing them, Dennis, is because you cannot solve their economic problem.
Well, let's look at that economic problem for a minute, shall we? And let's do an overview of what we are looking at right now. And obviously, to what came out largely from what you essentially told the nation about, look here, this money that you're paying, likelihood of the likelihood that you actually didn't spend it, and you're being asked to pay it back. So when we talk about the cries that come from people who are out in the street, true. The baby that was born was one of economic hardship. That people can't have jobs is an economic issue. That we don't have enough money to fund health is an economic issue. That we don't have enough money to send children to school or pay for their exams is an economic issue. That we want to defund education is an economic issue. That a young man is in the street and he's got to sell masks in order to survive.
And he's shot.
Literally to eat. And then he's shot. Those are the economic issues that we are talking about, that possibly if he was doing something else, and look, there's no justification for any of this, but that's his livelihood. And that his bill was 3 odd million shillings, and his family, his father, who's also a vendor, was asking himself, how on earth am I going to pay this? These are all economic issues. It doesn't matter where you look. The hinge on all of these problems, when you open that door that creaks so loudly, is economics. But we're in a situation whereby for every 100 shillings that the country makes, 70 of those shillings goes towards the payment of debt, for which Kenyans cannot see. So are you saying essentially, Jimmy, that if you solve the economic issue and have somebody at the top who is prudent enough to deal with these issues, a good number of the issues that we are calling here will not be ones for concern?
You said it very well. Let me just add. Every single revolution in the world has been based on economic issues. Every single one. Even I was here, remember, the beginning was economic and political freedom. 1945, world order changed.
Right? Mm-hmm.
But what was that war about? Economic. The Germans were killing the Jews and creating a new world order without Jews, because they felt the Jews were controlling the economy in Europe. Mm-hmm. Right? The world economic order that came out then was one side went to communism and America dominated capitalism. All right? Mm-hmm. In 1991, the end of the Cold War, and I want you to see the significance. 1945, world order changed. 1950, Kenya started the emergency war. That was when Mau Mau started, 1950. Well, then the emergency was called in 1952. In 1991, you had the end of the Cold War. So the end of more or less communism as we knew it before. Right? And what happened in Kenya and many other countries? Multipartyism started becoming a big campaign. All right? Big campaign. Significant times. It's all economic. In 2008, you had the big crisis in America, mortgage crisis. What had happened here? We had our clashes here that we've never seen. And it was a big catalyst to the new constitution in 2010. All right? Now, we are now in the next order. You can feel it in the world.
Right.
It is changing. The world order is changing. The dominance of America and its push, the way we even used to see Israel and everything, the whole game is changing, right? And there's a new economic order that is trying to be dealt with, and it's coming from China, primarily. That is also catalyzing us. But other things are coming that came out of the economic order. There's technology,
right,
information, right? We don't rely on just one or two mediums. So it is created more and more awareness. You have a younger, more educated population, especially in developing countries. So we are there. And we understand our problems. I remember, I'm glad you're reminding us, the country about the debt debate. I came out with a report in 2022,
yeah.
July, before the elections. I even paid for advertising space in both the Nation and Standard Group to say, by the way, as you're going to vote, because some of us have been blocked, as you're going to vote, please understand there is a problem here, an economic problem here. Your money is going to something, right, that has never come to your benefit, and it will keep going. It is going to create the biggest problem you have ever seen. It was creating it, it had started, and this is going to be the legacy. Sure enough, here we are today. We talked about default. We talked about all these things, and everybody said, he's talking numbers and figures people will never understand. Who cares about the economic agenda? That's what a lot of people told me. You're talking in Spice TV. How many Kenyans listen to Spice? It's the elite who listen to Spice. Dumb it down to wananchi. Wananchi now understand that money in their pocket has reduced to such an extent, they even know why. Wanazungumza mambo ya madeni. How does mwananchi not understand deni and they are fulizing every day? They understand it at a national scale. They get it. They get it. And you have articulated it very well, 70 shillings of every 100 that we give in taxation is going to debt.
But Jimi, sorry, just to quip in a bit, on that train of thought, when you are doing, I actually watched a series you were doing around the debt question in the country that year, but so did the Kenya Kwanza government in their manifesto. They talked about bottom up, and the conversation around the country was for hustlers, mama mboga, boda boda, and so the rallying call was still on the issue of economy, and there were promises that were made. We will stop this culture of borrowing, and there were figures that were being quoted then. They were reading the economic report of the country correctly, and so on the premise of that, people then hoped that for the first time then, we have somebody who feels us, because it was hustlers versus dynasties. The dynasties don't feel the economic pain, hustlers do. And so because this is one of our own, let us just get him into this position, and then we will sort out all these issues. But things have timed.
I fully agree with you. They helped bring the economic debate to the election. Yes. It was about the haves, the have-nots against the haves. That's what their premise was. And in as much as they tried to talk about debt, I don't think they fully understood the problem. Or if they did, they were hiding it from Kenyans. There was no way they were ever going to be able to fulfill those obligations that they promised, when 70%, in fact, at the time it was about 60 to 65%, 65 shillings of 100 were going to debt. Because look at revenue. Revenue is taxes and debt. Right? So if you're receiving 100 shillings and 65 is going to debt, what do you then need for the counties? The balance of 35 goes to the counties. Right? Then how do you pay salaries? How do you pay operations of government? Salaries is another 50 to 60. So you're borrowing. So saying that they will get out of the culture of debt was a lie. It was a lie.
So then if
they are borrowing, right, for their own recurrent expenditure, which is against the law, right? The law does not allow you. So they do not have money to fulfill any promise, even today. That's why they are resorting to shooting Yankee people. They cannot solve the problem, right? They cannot solve it because they do not have money.
Jimi, I'm hearing you say that everybody is aware that there is a debt problem, number one, and that there's not enough money to pay the debt and run the country at the same time.
Correct.
and that people have risen up to say, look, this is a problem here.
Correct.
You cannot make a conducive environment for us to get jobs. You can't educate our children. You can't put enough food on
Correct.
the table. And because we're bringing up those issues, rather than solve the problem because there is a personal interest there, you're going to shoot us to keep us quiet?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because what choices do they have by solving the problem? You have two choices. You default or you say, I'm not paying it. Our position is that it is odious debt, which means that it is illegal debt that we should not be paying. As far as I'm concerned, that debt, we have no debt in this country. So that 70 shillings of every 100 should be wiped out. And I would wipe it out like yesterday. Right? But what are the consequences of that? A lot of these people, and William Samoei Ruto is one of them, he was part of creating that odious debt. He was in the government of Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta. And they created that odious debt. In fact, William Samoei Ruto was the one given in the sharing of power the docket of finance. I know because I'm the one who did the MOU. His docket of finance. Rotich was his recommended appointee. So they know what they did. The minute you stop paying that debt, the creditors of that debt will look for them. The country will ask, why have we been paying that debt? We want whatever we paid to come back. What happens? They won't do it. So what is the other consequence? If you default, the economic ramifications that come out of a default will be much worse than you're talking today. They think they have stabilized the shilling, yet there's still economic pain. But I can tell you, default would mean the shilling is probably about 300-400 shillings
To the dollar.
All right? Everyone's life would literally come to a standstill. And that is more frightening than what they're currently doing. So, you say, postpone the problem. Sweep the problem under the rug. And if people come out, try and politicize it. Try and say, it's not about pain, it's political this, or it's tribe this, or it's that person, or it's this, or it's that. And hope that it's, I believe, after last year, they believed it was over. Okay? Now it has come back. Right? I watched William Ruto talk last week. That man is frightened. He is frightened. Okay? This system is frightened. You hear them, the system talk about shooting people. They are frightened. They are caged. They're in a corner. Right? They're wondering, can they handle another one and another one? Like this. The whole world saw what we saw last week. Right? They are frightened. Now, they did not anticipate it. So it'll be interesting to see how they believe they are going to manage this particular revolution. Now, just before you go on, Dennis, I want you to imagine to 2027 that every single June 25th will be celebrated this way. Are we agreed, Okari?
Yes.
So in 2027, which is the so-called targeted election, we have, my deputy has a case in court trying to make sure that the Supreme Court adheres to what is in the Constitution.
Yeah.
But let us even say it's 2027. June 25th falls within the 3-month campaign period to the election. I want you to imagine these demonstrations during campaign time. All right? 2 months to the election. This government has no chance of surviving. All right? It will probably react the same way if that's how they react, killing people. Right? And they'll brandish it, God knows what. They may even try to create a state of emergency or something of the sort. But at the end of the day, right, they will not be able to stay in power. So what some of us are asking is, why wait until then? You can't solve the problem. All you want to do is turn Kenya into killing fields, right? Killing young people, killing our future generations, right? You're doing so economically, now you're doing so with the gun. Why are you in power?
But Jimi, if that's the case, let's just assume, for this argument's sake, let's just assume they're not in power. Whoever takes over, because when this current government took over, among the first speeches, from the promises, and it was very clear, the signs were there, that look, we had promised this is what we're going to do to the economy to fix things, but we have seen that when we came into power, the empty coffers, there's no money. That's what they said. So the next government, whether it's this one that will still take over, another one coming in, there's already a conversation from these realignments that has, I'll call an offshoot that has come from this. And they're saying, look, your pay slips have been raided. We're going to make sure that we stop it. This housing levy, we're going to make sure that we stop it. They're already having that economic conversation that we're going to fix this. Yet we have a debt issue.
Correct.
And so my question to you is, what is this uncomfortable conversation we are not having as Kenyans? Because we may change the characters, the issues will still be the same.
Then that's a wonderful question. I'm so glad you brought it up. You're very right. There is that conversation. And I want to talk about the different groups. There's a broad-based group that is about continuity. Status quo, continuity. There's that group, and those were the presidential candidates of 2022. Their deputies are in another group, right? Which I will call the one-term group, the whatever you want to call them. But that's where their deputies are. And those are the ones having that conversation about reduction of taxation. But they are not telling you how they will pay the debt. That's the uncomfortable discussion. How do you reduce the 100 shillings? All right? These 70 shillings of every 100 going to debt is going to continue until 2034. In other words, it grows every year. In fact, this year, I'm waiting for the figures. We're estimating that they are short on about 250 billion worth of tax revenue. So it may not even be 70 this year. It is 78% by our estimated calculations. All right?
Wow.
Of our tax revenue going to debt. It will be worse next year. That's 2 trillion going to debt this year. It is another 2 trillion and more next year. And it continues until 2034. Right? Now, they are not having that conversation because who are they? Who are they? They are the same players. Uhuru and Ruto, I kept saying, were a virus that just keeps mutating. All right? In 2022, one was on his own, the other was supporting another candidate. And all these people you're talking about were in either one of those two camps. It is the virus keeping on mutating. They will never solve the problem. Because solving the problem means that you are going after the very people, right, that created it, that are your benefactors. You have benefited from. You've been made out of. You had jobs from. Right? So they will not go after them. So they will not change the arena. That's why there's a new alternative option that's coming out. And Gen Z are leading it. Okay? Where it's politics of issues. Politics real. Not tribe. Not this division, that division. Not telling us hustler dynasty. No. Not telling us I'll reduce housing levy and telling us I'll reduce taxes. Okay, so how do you pay the debt? I mean, let's be honest. Right? Let's be honest.
But you're never going to get out of it. You won't get out of it.
You'll not get out of the problem. You'll not solve the problem. Those, in fact, by the way, housing levy is bringing how much money? 70 billion? All right? 70 billion. Remove it. You are paying 2 trillion. Now, the converse, which is the alternative, is saying this, that our stolen future, we want to reclaim it. And the way you reclaim it economically is with debt. You remove that debt. You save 2 trillion every single year until 2034. Now, I want you to imagine what 2 trillion does. You're talking about Shah and Shif, nobody will have to pay it. You need 170 billion for universal health care. Nobody has to pay. You need another almost 200 for education. Primary, high school, and university. Nobody will have to pay. Okay? You imagine the amount of services, not only services, but development that you can do without borrowing a cent. We don't have a revenue problem in Kenya. We have an expenditure one. And the expenditure one is purely debt servicing.
Do we have a country that we can look at as an example that said, look, we are not going to pay debts?
Yes.
And so we look at the precedent that has been set.
What happened
Do you
is,
have
the issue of odious debt started with Cuba long time ago. In fact, the Americans helped them come out of a debt that was claimed by the French. But you have people like Mozambique, our neighbors here, who had what you call a tuna bond, like our equivalent of our Eurobond.
Yep.
Right? That went to their own constitutional court. I want you to imagine their laws are not anywhere as good as ours. Our chapter 12 in the Constitution, public finance, and our Public Finance Management Act are so good. Now, theirs are not as good, all right, in Mozambique. And when they were there, they went to Constitutional Court after the regime had left. Parliament was even a defendant of that debt, and they lost. And they reclaimed $2 billion from Credit Suisse, another bank, a Russian bank called RVM, right? And people were jailed. People were jailed. You have Malaysia that had the 1 MDB debt of $4 billion. That has jailed a former Prime Minister, Konese, for 12 years. Right? And many others. And Goldman Sachs has had to refund that money and pay a fine. So those are odious debt particular. Ours, Dennis, our laws are so good. All right? This is just, one doesn't even need to go to court. Power, all you need to do when you get to power is say, I'm not paying that thing. It is unconstitutional. It is not in our laws. And whoever you gave that money to, because it never entered the consolidated fund, go and look for those people.
But Jimi, there is the talk in terms of I'll not pay this odious debt, and there is what economists are saying, and I just want you to respond to that we stop paying that debt and the economy automatically tanks based off what international organizations would say. So how would you
How does it
respond?
tank? Why does it tank?
Because apparently the rating of Kenya's economy would not be so good.
No. Are they saying that we should pay criminality? Dennis? Is that what they're saying? We audited the expenditure of government and the tax revenue of government between 2013 and 2023. 10 years. All right? Do you know what the deficit is in 10 years? Was only 1.3. In other words, they had a shortage between expenditure and revenue of 1.3 trillion. We borrowed 7.7. 6.4 trillion we did not need.
Right.
So 1.3 trillion is what we need in 10 years. That's roughly what? A deficit of 200 per year? Right? 100, in fact, 100 and something per year? Right? 100 billion is our deficit. In other words, we have the revenue. So even if those people say they don't want to help us, we are not going to give you development money, we don't need it. Do you understand? We don't need it. So why should we tank? Because we need who?
Okay.
We die if we continue paying.
Were there external beneficiaries to this debt? And I think that's
Absolutely.
the question here that we ask. Because one would imagine that you take debt as an entity, as a state entity, and that is supposed to go towards development projects, depending on what your internal laws are. We know what that is. You borrow for debt or you borrow for shortfall in the budget, in the fiscal period, but that's not exceeding a term of 90 days.
Yes.
We know this. So if you were to borrow from an external party, more money than you needed, because we're going to say needed here, and looking at that 1.1 figure that you've given, that we were able to then see development infrastructure that went alongside that debt, that borrowing money. We didn't see anything for the 6.3.
Correct.
That's hanging out somewhere.
Absolutely.
Was not in the Consolidated Fund report.
Correct.
Not in the Auditor General report.
Correct.
6.3.
Nowhere in the budget.
Nowhere in the budget. So then the assumption is that the person who is lending it and the person who is receiving it are in bed together.
Absolutely.
Or that's the it would be accusation.
Absolutely.
And along the lines of, these are more or less the same characters who then put us on some world index for how you should be rated in terms of whether you're low income, least developing, whatever it is that you are. And then they tell you then, based on that, that's what your credit rating is. But these fellas are on the same bed together, and they're once telling you that this is what your debt looks like, and this is how you can't pay, and we won't accept a situation where you won't pay.
I fully agree with you. I want to give an example of the first Eurobond we took, right? The first $2 billion Eurobond we took from JP Morgan Chase. That $2 billion, all right? If you read the prospectus of JP Morgan Chase as they were trying to get this money from others, because you understand that they raise it from the market.
Yeah.
All right? It's not that they have the money in the bank. They raise it. As they raise it from the market, they have got to go out with a prospectus. Kenya looking for a sovereign bond. And if you read the prospectus, it's done by Rotich, saying it is for development projects in Kenya.
Okay.
All right? Now, JP Morgan Chase has a fiduciary responsibility to the people who are giving them money to ensure that the prospectus is accurate. So all they needed to do was say, which development projects? Right? And those development projects are anchored in the budget. All right? All of them. So it should have been funding in the budget. It doesn't exist in the budget. So they didn't care. They are no different to the allegations against Adani. Right? You raise money under falsehood from the emerging markets. Those are people to be investigated by SEC. So yes, they're collaborators. They are collaborators. They open an account, right, in JP Morgan Chase for people from the Treasury to sign.
Yeah.
Those are collaborators. They should have read our constitution. So we have a challenge here. I agree. But the same ones who are going to rate us do. Our government will be very clear that, by the way, we are not going to pay what is illegal to us. Those that you gave money, kindly look for them.
Yeah, because it's like
it
somebody
is
else
odious
has
to
moved,
us as Kenyans.
Somebody else has moved into the house.
Yes.
And you're saying that the person who rented the house before owes you some
money.
For
Go and look for them.
Go and look for that.
Yes.
Essentially what we're saying.
Because it never came to our benefit
And all
as
of these,
we moved in. Yes.
And all of these issues that we see today are hinged on some of these decisions to the trillions, essentially. And that's why we have people, and that's why you have the nation on its knees complaining and in the street.
And it will not end until that virus of debt payments is cut. That is actually the removal of our slavery. So Dennis Okari, I want to say, you're very right. Which are the players?
You know, it's so serious. I was just doing my calculations here. $2 billion US, you convert it to Kenya shillings, assuming on average you live 50 years. Every day of your 50 years, do you know how much you'll be eating every day? 14.1 million every day for 50 years.
Yes. Now that's $2 billion.
That's $2 billion.
I want you to understand our debt is now creeping to 12 trillion.
12 trillion.
That's unbelievable.
And in the last few, and we keep paying. So you have just said we've paid 2 trillion this year.
Yes.
This thing doesn't go down. It keeps going up. When Ruto took power, it was at 8.5. It's now 12. What is going on? Do you think you'll ever pay it? You can't. Because as I said, your money, 70% of it, of your taxes, are going to paying it. You need to keep borrowing to live.
Essentially what you're saying, we who are alive today, our unborn children to their 10th generation will still be paying these current.
Yes, if they're still alive.
Unless somebody comes
We are
and
dying.
says,
We are dying. If you're not dying economically, you're dying with a bullet. We are dying.
something's got to give.
Kenya cannot continue with this. And anybody who does not address this as the biggest factor today, tomorrow, and the day after is wasting Kenya's time.
That's a good
All
place.
their stories are just rubbish.
And that's a place for us to think about this, because we can tie it directly to that. And for us to be able to think about, I mean, it's a lot to take in, but it's necessary to do and to have conversations around, and the discourse has to continue. Thank you for opening eyes, Jimmy.
Thank you.
And we look forward to the next time we can talk again, because we must keep these conversations front and
Thank
center.
you very much.
Jimi Wanjigi has been our guest this hour, looking at some of these things. My goodness, you start off Tuesday and you're like, what on earth are we going to do? Now here's Dennis with his 50 years, and I don't know.
Yeah, you calculated.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.